world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Monday, the 10th of August, year of our Lord 2026. Well, we have a new strategy against flock cameras. We'll give you today, one at a time, how you can block and protest them at the same time legally. And we're also going to take a look at the chaos that is unleashed over the weekend, a massive, dangerous traffic stop that was caused by the flock surveillance system and the cops so dead sure that they've got it right. And also more stories about cops abusing this newfound power for their own personal use. So how do we protect ourselves against this fourth turning, as Donald Trump is the accelerationist, pouring gasoline on the dumpster fire that we have globally? Well, we're going to take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at tacos, nachos, and burritos. You can't afford the burritos because Trump always chickens out and there's not a chance Hormuz opens. We'll be right back. Let's begin with the fact that before we get into the more current news, let's get a little bit of a perspective on this. You know, we had the 81st anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. Personally, my opinion is that rather than the good war, World War II was the one that corrupted our moral foundation. When it began, we said, and rightfully so, it was a moral outrage, a day of infamy, that the Japanese would attack Pearl Harbor. Yes, there were provocations on our side before that, but it was nothing compared to that. They escalated it to a new level. They attacked in a physical war of aggression people that had not attacked them. Yes, we did attack them economically. I understand that wars typically begin with sanctions. And that is one of the things that we're looking at in the Middle East right now. And unless they're serious about removing the sanctions, they're not serious about removing the war either. Nevertheless, why do I say that this was when we lost our moral compass? Well, because, again, the Germans had decided that they were going to try civilian bombing as a strategy, and it was not a strategy that worked. Actually, it backfired, and it backfired for us as well. When we decided that we'd retaliate in kind with the bombing of Dresden, the firebombing of Dresden, which is arguably, I think, more people killed perhaps with that than at Nagasaki. Nevertheless, they just had the 81st anniversary of this. And again, I hear the arguments. I've always heard this all my life, and I bought it for a while. Well, this ended the war quickly and saved the lives of American soldiers. Well, if you wanted to end the war quickly, you could have nuked their military. I said, well, we would have had to fought hand to hand from island to island. No, you didn't have these types of weapons you could have used on various islands. You couldn't use this on their fleet. All it takes is one plane to drop this. Well, at the ceremony, the mayor of Nagasaki called nuclear weapons absolute evil. And I agree with him. He says it's a very dangerous game to play this game of nuclear deterrence. It is mad, mutually assured destruction, but it is also mad crazy. So the theory of nuclear deterrence is extremely dangerous and fragile. Nuclear weapons are not a necessary evil, but an absolute evil. He said the more you rely on nuclear deterrence, the more you increase the risk of nuclear war. And just look at what Trump is doing in the Middle East. At the same time, Israel is allowed to have nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia now, he says, is allowed to have nuclear weapons, but not Iran. And so we are willing to basically expend all of our ammunition trying to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. All it does is convince them that that is vital for their defense. If they don't have that, they're going to be vulnerable to attack increasingly from Israel or Saudi Arabia. And again, in that region, What are the two worst governments? Certainly two of the worst governments, not the worst two. Iran's not a great government either. But neither is Saudi Arabia, and certainly not Israel, conducting endless genocide. So the Nagasaki attack in 1945 killed 70,000 by the end of the year. Not all of them died right away. They had a slow death. Hiroshima killed 140,000. It certainly is amazing. And these are civilian targets. For the longest time, Western civilization, based on Christian principles, said you avoid attacking civilians, non-combatants, women, and children. You wear uniforms to identify yourself as a combatant. Did we complain, and rightfully so, about the fact that Muslims in Iraq would take refuge in mosques and in civilian areas? That they wear civilian clothes? It was impossible to distinguish them from combatants? That is... when we talk about wearing uniforms to identify the combatants and trying to avoid civilian casualties, that is based on Christian principles. We don't have any Christian principles left anymore in our government or in our society. And we need to recover those. And we got to start talking about the fact that they served us better when we had those Christian values. Europe was once bigger than the U.S. economy. So what happened with that? Yeah, we've had this climate MacGuffin for quite a while. I had a listener sent me this picture. It was actually a tombstone they came across in a graveyard. He said, I thought you'd get a kick out of this. It was a tombstone for MacGuffin. Of course, they spell a little bit differently. Of course, there's no agreement as to how MacGuffin should be spelled when Hitchcock references it. And when I talk about it, it's always a thing that motivates people to follow a pursuit or something. And in the movies, it was a Maltese Falcon, or it was the plans for a bomb or a plane or something. Everybody was chasing it. It wasn't important in and of itself. What was important was the fact that it motivated the characters. And so the climate MacGuffin, just like the COVID MacGuffin, were there to motivate you and to get you to do a certain thing. It really didn't matter what that was, because they could go from global cooling to global warming to climate change to a pandemic, and it was always the same thing. We need to track and measure everything that you do. And we need to restrict your movements and all the rest of the stuff. Well, now they've got the fly cameras, the AI data centers, and I guess they don't need the MacGuffin anymore. As a matter of fact, when we look at what is happening with these data centers, I think they have buried the MacGuffin once and for all. People are talking about how they're massive, massive heat islands. Oh, we're going to burn down the planet. It's like, no, you're not concerned about energy use or the so-called CO2 release, as long as it is one of the data centers. Doesn't count. Just like it doesn't count when we do that with war. It doesn't count when we fire off all those missiles. It doesn't count when we shoot up the satellites. It doesn't count when the government or the corporate elite are doing it. It only counts when you or I are driving our cars. It's absolutely absurd. Well, the MacGuffin is a thing that took down Europe. Europe was once bigger than the U.S. economy. What happened? This article from Zero Hedge asks. Well, I don't think that they got the answer, quite frankly. They'll talk about different things like, well, in 2020, Brexit happened and finally took effect, and the UK's economy was removed from the total for the European Union and so forth and so on. But that's not when it went down. If you look at their own data that they have in the article, in 2014, it was still, if the U.S. was 100, to normalize it, it was 107. And then after 2014, 2015, it suddenly dropped. What was that? What happened in 2015? It then dropped from being 7% higher to 10% lower. Well, there was this thing that happened in 2015 called the Paris Climate Treaty, and the Europeans were eager to implement it right away. It was an economic suicide pact, and I would say it's a suicide pact in more ways than economic as well. It has absolutely destroyed their manufacturing and their industry. It was the 2015 Paris Climate Treaty, what they call an accord, that gave China and India the right to build as many and as dirty a power plants as they could. They could make cheap coal and not put any scrubbers on it, nothing at all. And yet everybody else had to immediately start reducing things, and Europe jumped into that with both feet. The U.S. was a little bit slower at adapting this, but nevertheless, it dropped down. It took a long, deep drop, and then has not recovered to the level of the U.S. economy since then. When you look at what is happening in Europe, all the German car companies are basically going out of business. They prided themselves on their German engineering in the cars, but you look at Volkswagen, you look at Porsche, all these different companies are really struggling. And of course, manufacturing and industry in the UK is absolutely dead because they followed the same suicide pact. So Brexit happened in 2020, but I think it was really the Paris Climate Accord that took it down. Well, as we look at this fourth turning that is rapidly approaching us, and I've said so many times, Trump is a one-man fourth turning. He is checking all the boxes to accelerate this crisis. The fourth turning doesn't end with a return to prior equilibrium. The fourth turning ends with a new order. For better or worse, depending on which force prevails in the decisive battles of the crisis era. That is what we have seen in terms of a pattern that was pointed out by Strauss and Howe in their book, The Fourth Turning. The people who in their book prior to that, Generations, gave us terms like millennials and Generation X and so forth. Everybody uses those terms. Very few people talk about the fourth turning. They do at internationalman.com, which is where this article is from. But as they pointed out in the early 1990s, they said, well, based on the cycle of history, about every 80 years, we have a massive economic downturn, I should say, or turning over, right? Starts with the economy, always has the economy as part of it. Usually it involves war. And the previous four turnings were the Great Depression and World War II. Prior to that, the American Revolution, which really was about the Industrial Revolution. And that was when things started to synchronize on a global basis. Prior to that, it was the U.S. and the U.K. that were synchronized, and they went back 500 years in American and British history to look at the trend. But prior to that, it was the American Revolution. And so you see that each of those had an economic component to it, of course, but also war was involved. And that's where we are right now. They said probably sometime in the mid-2000s, they said in the early 1990s, there'll be a global economic problem. Now, there was, right? We remember that, mid-2000s. And they said that'll start the fourth turning. It'll end probably around 2029, and 2030 is the date that the UN has fixed as their new world order kickoff date. So as they point out, these battles are being fought right now across many different domains. And think about how many of these boxes Donald Trump checks. Monetary, the digital currencies, check that one. Geopolitical, the realignment of the Middle East and the unraveling of the post-Cold War security architecture. Well, he's really checked that one multiple times, hasn't he? And the collapse of institutional trust. The reemergence of a heterodox analysis as a credible alternative to official consensus. Well, he's working on that now. He's with his crony capitalism and his overt public corruption. What he's doing is he's pushing people into socialism because they see him as the face of capitalism. No, he's the face of corruption. It's crony capitalism is corruption, folks. It is not free markets. Not at all. He's anything but. As a matter of fact, he's having the government buy into various corporations and run them and do things for his own personal advantage. But even if he didn't have the corruption aspect of it, what he is doing is economic fascism. It is central planning and control. It is a merger of corporations and government. People see this, and they think their only response to that is socialism. And that's what's driving this movement in the Democrat Party. What distinguishes the people who navigate fourth turning successfully is not superior prediction, but superior optionality. Now, this is what you can do. In other words, we can't change, personally, you and I can't change Trump. We can try to get the information out there so there's a massive understanding of what is happening. And there's a lot of value to that. You see that happening right now in terms of the awareness against flock and the surveillance centers that are being put up. Don't know if it's going to be enough to stop it, even with that. But that is something that is motivating people to do something at the local level. And we're going to talk about that coming up. But the key issue is, what can you do given these sets of circumstances to understand what is happening? What do you do, though? It's not just about understanding what can happen. So he said that successful people will hold assets in multiple forms and jurisdictions. Now, most of us, it's not really possible for us to have what they would call residential ambiguity. You know, the people at International Man will recommend, I know it's affiliated with Doug Casey, I think it's his website. And I used to read his newsletter. I used to get it on a subscription. And what he was saying was, you want to make sure that you've got citizenship in multiple countries so you can go from one to the other, right? And I understand that. You're always treated better if you're not one of their, quote, citizens, because they don't think of you as a citizen. They think of you as a subject. And so if you are subject to the jurisdiction, as the 14th Amendment would say, of another country, then sometimes that'll help you in terms of navigating what is happening, especially if you're a migrant or whatever. But most of us don't have that residential ambiguity where we could claim multiple citizenships, but we can have multiple forms of assets. So they maintain relationships across multiple networks, retain cognitive independence to update their models when demanded, and they have not surrendered the most fundamental asset of all, the capacity to act on their own judgment. What does that mean? What does that look like to see these different types of assets? Well, that means that you start to get out of fiat currency exclusively. Is one of the key things that you want to look at, but also to have the right kinds of skills and, as he pointed out, networking. Networking even within your locality. Agency is what the propaganda apparatus is designed to extinguish. The entire architecture of manufactured consent, from the captured universities to the curated information fed to get people to buy comfort through credit financing. It's all designed to produce a population that doesn't exercise independent judgment because it's been conditioned not to trust its own government. And he points out the perfect example of this is what we went through with COVID. Remember that? Proof of concept that even people who did not fully believe the narrative could be induced to act as though they did. I've talked about this multiple times, how, a couple of times that we wanted to go out to eat during the insanity period, we'll call that the COVID insanity period, we would pick deliberately small restaurants and got kicked out of them. I said, well, I know if we go to a corporate chain, they're going to just be following policy and they'll kick us out. But if we go to a regular restaurant, perhaps the businesses there that are under pressure right now, perhaps they'll be rational enough to not try to enforce this irrational mask mandate on it. But they did, restaurant after restaurant. And then we had the cops who would enforce it no matter what. Taking a look at this. This is a 21-year-old mom of 3 who had a medical exemption from wearing a mask. Look what the cop did to her. He's grabbing her by the throat, choking her. He's wearing his mask. You will wear a mask, or you'll stop breathing on me. I'm going to choke you to death. And then a woman comes over. She takes a kick at the woman. Yeah, what are you doing? I'm following orders. I'm just doing my job. I'm just following orders. Yeah, that was really, when you look at COVID, it really was a terrifying indication of just what sheep people can be and how they can cooperate with their masters on all of this. Free people in control of their own affairs are more productive, more innovative, and ultimately more ungovernable than any administrative apparatus can tolerate. And that's what it looks like when you are a free person. They will come after you. So that's what you have to plan for. The turnings theory doesn't predict what the new order will look like, but it does predict that people who enter the resolution phase with real assets, genuine skills, and of course now they're back to their multiple jurisdictions, and uncompromised mental models will be disproportionately represented in whatever comes next. The compliant will have managed their risk by surrendering to the system. The independent will have managed the risk by retaining the capacity to leave it. And so the real crisis, as I point out, is not the one that triggered it. All these things that are happening right now that Trump is doing that are accelerating the foreturning are just that. They're not the trigger. They're the accelerant. But the trigger was the slow, comfortable, credit-financed surrender of agency that made populations incapable of resisting what mattered the most. And a good example of this is Trump at the UN. He's now rejected the UN Farm Declaration, and he seeks for the UN to have a declaration about free speech. Well, if he's free to ignore the declaration about farming, which probably, even if he does, you'll have the next Democrat will jump fully on board with that, just as they did with the UN-backed climate accord. And of course, Trump abided by all of that. Trump does not want to get out of the UN. I mean, the answer to this is not to entreat the UN for freedom while you continue to fund it. Don't plead for your freedom and pay the people who are taking it away from you at the same time. Just get out of the UN. That's really the solution, the obvious solution, but he doesn't do it. And then when you look at the Chinese electric vehicles, we had Biden demanding that no matter what the cost, no matter whether you like it or not, you will drive an electric vehicle or you'll not have a car at all. And so Trump wants to make sure that you will have an American electric vehicle. He's not going to give you the freedom to have internal combustion engines. No. We're going to go down that road, still going to be pushing the electric vehicles because, of course, Musk is one of his big supporters. So they banned Chinese electric vehicles in the USA. However, if you look at what is happening, that's just a head fake. The Chinese electric vehicles are still being bought by Waymo.
Well, if you're into Waymo, I have found the absolute jackpot. Mesa, Arizona, hundreds, literally hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, of these Ojai Zeekers. That one's even being driven. This is where they're getting manufactured, though. Mesa, Arizona. They come from China, unassembled, and then they get all of their stuff put on. But I can just not explain to you the absolute magnitude of what I am seeing here. It's absolutely breathtaking. It goes and it goes and it goes. Let me take this off so I can lift up my arm a little bit so you can see more, but hundreds and hundreds.
500, actually.
This is an absolute...
At least.
I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah,
so
it's
many.
who you know, isn't it? You will not be able to buy a cheap Chinese electric vehicle, but Waymo will. And then they will do everything they can to make sure that you can't afford or are prohibited or harassed out of your own private vehicle, especially if it's an internal combustion engine. But don't worry, because Waymo is going to have your back here. They're going to be able to charge you by the ride using cheap electric vehicles that Americans are not allowed to buy, but Google is. So, yeah, this is, I guess, really part of the Trump economics program.
Tired of gas prices? Tired of the war? Come see it. Introducing Trump Cruise to Hormuz. We got Mar-a-Lago face babes, Kid Rock, YMCA, but not gay, McDonald's 24/7. Nobody's done that on a boat. It's safe, it's beautiful, and kids eat free. Now look, the war costs every family $1,000. You're already paying. So for $4,000 more, you're on the boat. Call in the next 10 minutes. We'll throw in a second week. Nobody's leaving anyway. Great deal. Call now.
Total conflict cost estimated $600 billion. Cruise fare non-refundable. In the event of escalation, entertainment schedule continues as planned. Straight conditions may vary.
Straight conditions may vary. Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that Trump would be straight, right? So anyway, especially not after all the LGBT things that he had at Mar-a-Lago. But let's just take a look at what is happening with gold this last week. Gold has had the best week that it's had in a very long time, went up $300 this past week, driven by one disappointing labor market report after another. And remember that they always make these labor reports look better than they really are. That's the thing that you should factor in. They consistently redo the labor reports when they do the next one. They revise down the previous one to make this one look like a better trend. And so it was the best weekly performance since January this last week. On Wednesday, gold prices surged above $4,200 an ounce after they said only 44,000 private sector jobs were created in July. The rally then kicked into overdrive on Friday after the U.S. Labor Department said the U.S. economy lost 23,000 jobs last month. They had expected that they were going to gain 85,000. So that's a shortfall of about 100,000 jobs. It's huge. Second time this year, the U.S. labor market has contracted. What is that about? Well, as we look at this, people are digesting this information and say, well, if the labor market is contracting because of perhaps a recession or contraction, whatever you want to call it, then the Fed is going to be raising interest rates because they don't want to accentuate that. And yet we still have the inflation problem. Welcome to stagflation. It's not just the Trump commercial that is a throwback to the 1970s. It is also the economic conditions that he is creating here. And all of us understand what stagflation was. If you're of a certain age, it was truly amazing. And now we're looking at something Gerald Celente has pointed out for the longest time. He thinks it'll be dragflation. And we're not talking about people who are straight or not straight. We're talking about taking the economy down, not just zero growth, but actual big decline. And so this one article from Kitco says, we said don't wait for September. Gold just had its best week since January. Is the next stop 5,000? Well, we don't know. But the key thing is, because you got people who are reacting, a lot of this stuff is just noise on a longer trend line. Noise from Trump. You know, we won the war, we didn't win the war. We won the war, we didn't win the war. It's kind of like Daisy, isn't it? It's not just nacho and taco, but it's like the daisy, plucking the different petals off. No, the real key is that you need to keep your agency, like I was just saying about the fourth turning. But a lot of people are now talking about 5,000. UBS says by the first half of 2027. Of course, these big banks have typically been conservative about that. But as they look at the weak payroll, they said, well, this increases the chance that the Fed will not hike interest rates to do anything about inflation. And understand there isn't any way that they can hike the interest rates far enough to do anything about inflation because the debt is too large. The massive $40 trillion debt that we're looking at has so much leverage over what the Federal Reserve can do that they're really constricted in a way that they weren't constricted back in the 1970s. So people are looking at this and saying, well, they're not going to increase the rates. Yeah, they're not going to. And so inflation is back on the table. That was one of the reasons why the big response to gold was about inflation. But we've seen this movie before. It is certainly rhyming with what we went through with the Arab oil embargo. Now we see the same thing happening with the Trump Zionist oil embargo, which is what we have right now. We're going to talk about that when we come back. But as they point out, the gold, and Tony has said this many times, it's taken everything they've thrown at it, and people understand that it is something that is there in these times of troubles, in these times of fourth turnings. So if you want to do something about that, you want to preserve your agency, go to davidknight.gold. That'll take you to Tony Arterburns' Wise Wolf Gold. You can even start to accumulate on a regular basis, a small amount each month, and he will manage that for you. There's not any other gold dealers I'm aware of that do that type of thing. But if you go to davidknight.gold, I'll take you to Tony, and he has Wolfpack. You can set up a monthly amount that you want to do each month, from a very small amount to even a very large amount. We're going to take a quick break, folks, and we will be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Well, over the weekend, we recruited another congressman to the anti-flock cause. This is Congressman Marlin Stutzman from Indiana. He's vowing to pursue legislation in Congress to rein in the proliferation of flock cameras by law enforcement after he experienced his own traffic stop, aided by the license plate readers. So he goes home, and a cop follows him home and comes up to, behind him at home with flock cameras. Actually, I don't think he was driving in the car. I think they came up to the house. And I guess he was embarrassed to have the police at his house. All the neighbors wanted, why are the cops at the congressman's house? Well, we noticed that your registration had expired. So they're basically looking at all the cars and doing an audit check on them. Have you paid this? Have you paid that? We come to your house to do that. He said, we don't need to have that. Oh, that's only the tip of the iceberg, Congressman. You have no idea. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of other people who were converted into the Stop the Flock camera camp over the weekend as well. There was a high-risk traffic stop on I-94. They basically stopped all lanes of traffic and surrounded a vehicle, guns drawn, because Flock had labeled it as a murder suspect. This is out of Milwaukee on I-94. So we've got a murderer in the car, says Flock. They're absolutely certain of this because, hey, it comes from Flock and the data centers. So it was a very touchy situation. Somebody could have gotten killed. And somebody could have gotten killed on the interstate. Whenever you stop traffic on the interstate, you usually have some kind of an accident, some kind of a rear end accident. I've seen it over and over again. I worked for a short period of time with a company that was doing the camera monitoring on the interstate system in North Carolina, and it invariably would happen. Even if somebody would just break down, but if you stopped traffic, and the guys would sit there on the monitor, they go, oh, look at that, the cops stopped traffic on the interstate. They got, get out of there, you're going to have it, and sure enough, and it hits. But you see this type of thing over and over again. This is what it looked like. Look at this. This is somebody with one of those traffic cameras. And by the way, these cameras can really zoom in a long, long way. These things were originally developed for casinos. They see all the way down the interstate in one direction, and they'll pull it back around the other direction as well. So there you can see they stopped every single lane. They think they've got a murderer in the car. Well, the police chief came out to the defense of Flock. He said, well, it's not Flock's fault. He said, we had some officers who were supposed to remove that car. We had checked it out and were supposed to remove it out of the hot list, and they didn't do it. So it was human error. Well, the problem is that when Flock tells them that they've identified a murderer, they take that very seriously. And especially because now this is not human error. This is coming from a machine. It's coming from a data center. So be very, very careful. Well, I just wanted to give you an update. You remember the video that I had a couple of weeks ago, an elderly man sitting in a lawn chair holding a pole that had a sign on the top of it, and he put that sign in front of the Flock camera. And what it said was, down with Flock cameras, right? So he was blocking the Flock camera and protesting at the same time. And the video was shot and went viral on the internet. The guy said, are they going to arrest you? And I think so. And they had a bunch of police cars that were there. He wasn't touching the Flock camera, but he was going to be arrested for obstructing it, everybody thought. And the guy who was filming it said, well, he said, what's your name? I'm going to check on it and make sure that they arrest you. I'm going to bail you out. Well, he didn't have to. The man's name was Carl Gunn. The man in the lawn chair with a 12-foot pole and the sign at the top of it said, down with Flock cameras. Police arrived, and they spent between 15 minutes and a half hour trying to find something that they could charge him for and arrest him for, but they couldn't find anything. This is in St. Pete, Clearwater in Pinellas County. And so he did not get arrested. As a matter of fact, he continues to do this on a weekly basis. And so if you don't touch these things, you can block them and you can protest. That is your First Amendment right. And so as that was happening and he did not get arrested, and we find a good way to both block these things as well as protest them legally, we did have a another cop who was arrested. This is a Florida detective arrested for using flock cameras to spy on her husband's ex-wife. Brandy Almany used police surveillance tools and flock street cameras to track her husband's ex, running her plate dozens of times. We have seen this happen over and over again. Guys who are stalking a woman they're obsessed with, or an ex-wife or an ex-husband. We've seen this happening over and over again. We've had police chiefs who have been fired for doing this very thing. This is a police detective who was doing it. Well, a lot of cities are revoking their flock contracts. The problem is not nearly enough. We've only had 54 cities have blocked this. And in many cases, a lot of them are blocking flock cameras, immediately replacing them with the Axon license plate readers because they can be mounted to existing street lamps. And they're stealthier. So you can put these things up, people don't see them as easily as they do the flock cameras. And the reality is that it's not only attaching them to the light poles, but in many cases, they're actually embedding it into the light itself. There's a street light with 0.5 terabyte of surveillance storage inside it. This is what one city council found out, and they found that it has 2 cameras and 0.5 terabyte of storage. So this jurisdiction bought 4,000 of these street lamps that came with surveillance on board. How about that? It's not just intel inside. It is the government intel that is inside. So this story is being pushed by the people who want to have war with Russia. Drones are spotted over German base days after Leipzig bomb incident. Well, the reality is that we know that it is a threat, don't we? We see drones flying over houses or over military bases. We take that as a threat. Why don't we take that as a threat when you have jurisdictions like several of the ones around here? We have in Knoxville, they have put up millions of dollars in a contract to have surveillance drones. So they're not limited to a particular physical location. They're not limited to a pole or to a street light, but they will be flying over residential neighborhoods. They'll be flying down the roads, all these different places, mobile surveillance to trap you and to audit you as you go along your way. No, it is a threat, folks. They put this story out about the drones over German base. But folks, this is the same as the war that they're conducting against civilians across this country. Well, let's talk a little bit about the real war, the Iran war that's going on. I say real war. The other one is real, but this is the physical war. There's a report coming out from CNN and another one from Washington Post. There's been multiple reports over the last couple of weeks about how the munition supplies, especially for defensive missiles, are really drawn down, so much so that they're having to cut the supply to Ukraine. And so the Europeans and Ukraine are freaked out because they want to continue this Ukraine war, but we just don't have all the missiles to send to them anymore. So there's a report from CNN that Trump's top general is looking for an off-ramp, saying the military options are limited. And so I guess in a sense, the empire is striked out, not back, but out. And remember all those people who are saying, this will never be a quagmire. All the people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin at the Daily Wire, people like Mark Levin. And now they're desperate for an exit, but they can't find one. They have to try to find some way to save face for the empire. They can't make it look like an abject defeat, which it is. And so will they continue it? Will they double down and escalate? The key thing is that Trump would love to do that for his Zionist masters and his paymasters, but they just don't have the resources to do it. Over the last few weeks, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, has privately made it clear to other top Trump advisors that the U.S. needs to find an off-ramp because the military options on the table to escalate the conflict could backfire. And air power alone is unlikely to achieve Trump's stated objectives. What stated objectives? We have some objectives that have kind of emerged in a de facto way, but he has never really clearly stated what he wants other than regime change. Are you going to be able to use air power to do regime change? No, they tried that. That didn't work. They assassinated a bunch of people. All that did was get people to support the regime that they were previously trying to overthrow. What about attacking the nuclear facilities? Well, they bombed it into nuclear dust, as Trump likes to say. He says, yeah, it's all just nuclear dust. We could go there for a PR thing, but we don't really need to. But we got to continue the war for that, evidently, because Israel demands it. So I don't know if there really are any objectives. They're certainly not achievable by air power, because both of those things, those two objectives, have both now been turned back and have failed. So more bombing is not going to do anything about it. As a matter of fact, Trump even said, hey, we can see their name tags from space, so we know nobody's going in there. It's just a bunch of nuclear dust. When you do civilian bombing and do more of that, of course, you get even more blowback. Well, Kaine is not alone in his view. Other key cabinet officials, including CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who, by the way, when they had the initial meeting, when you had Netanyahu and his Mossad partner came in and double-teamed Trump with all that information, and Trump bought it, yeah, okay, we'll do it. John Ratcliffe, the director of the CIA, came back and he called it farcical. And yet, Netanyahu and the Mossad have gaslit, or they have paid off Trump to the extent that he still wants to go along with this. Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance are supposedly cabinet officials who are on board with John Ratcliffe's assessment. But the aim has been to make it clear that limitations and pitfalls of available military operations, including those that do not involve putting boots on the ground, said the source. So the question is, will Trump do that? That's the last thing that he could do. Do you really think that he cares about American lives enough not to pull that option? Will Trump listen to the people, or will he only listen to the Zionist paymasters that he has? Trump has foolishly and consistently appeared averse to the idea. He's consistently appeared to be averse to the idea of deploying ground troops, but he is instead foolishly signaling that he believes that air bombing can force them to agree to a deal on his terms. No, it won't. We're now 6 months into this war that he claimed that he'd won in the first week, and he's claimed that he won it probably about 30 times since then. He claimed that Iran's military capabilities had been decimated, yet Trump's most senior general is privately arguing that there's no easy military solution to end a war the president chose to enter. As a matter of fact, what it has decimated are our munitions, and our budget, and our debt has been exploded with all this stuff. You've got this Fox News commentator, Pete Hegseth, War Pete, who's now drunk with power, not with alcohol as he used to be. So Trump is very frustrated with this. He apparently boiled over at Camp David in anger at War Pete. Said, I thought this had been fixed, all these bombs. Where are my bombs? I want more bombs. I mean, I would love to have that recording. It probably looks something like that viral video that came from a movie about Hitler in the bunker. You know, he's probably banging his hands on the desk saying, my generals have failed me. So yeah, they betrayed me and they betrayed my war. He tried to swat down reports of U.S. weapons, but then that made the story even louder. That's what he always does.
We don't yet live in a post-missile scarcity society. So.
That's right. That's right. Well, you know, rather than deny these stories, what Trump does is he gives them credibility. And I think they are. We had, if you remember the book that was put out by the Washington Post reporters, or was it New York Times? I don't remember. But it's something about regime in the title. And rather than denying the stuff being true, he went into a rage saying, I need to know who told them that. He's basically doing the same thing here. He's basically confirming the story as he flies into a rage, saying, I'm going to hunt down these people who leaked this, and we're going to have severe penalties for these treasonous statements. You see, truth is treason in the empire of lies, as we've always heard, isn't it? This is the Trump empire of lies. And if you tell the truth about what they're doing, especially about their war of aggression, their war of choice, well, that's treason. because Trump is the government, right? Anything that you do against Trump is done against the government. Well,
I am the law.
he scared me with that. That was pretty loud. But yeah, I am the law. I am the Judge Dredd. This, I guess, is the real Epic Fury. The Operation Epic Fury was really Operation Epstein Fury, but this has now reached to the level of Epic Fury, directed at War Pete, who then redirected it to his subordinate like a real man. It's not me. It's the guy who works for me. The same thing that he sees Trump doing all the time, isn't it? So Trump kicks the cat and Pete kicks the cat. They don't accept responsibility for anything that they do. So he wants to seek long prison sentences for figures who pass what he says are treasonous statements to the media. Well, if you get somebody who tried to put a guy in jail for just touching the water in his reflecting pool, what do you think he's going to do? What is a tyrant going to do in rage when somebody tells the truth in his empire of lies? Defense companies, he said, are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. Yeah, and you're adding debt at a rate that is far higher than we've ever seen in our country's history as well. Somebody's going to pay for that. What is the cost in that? And so he says long-term jail sentences will be sought for these people who say that we're running out of ammunition. Yeah, he tried to put that guy in jail for 10 years for touching the water of his reflecting pool. So Hegseth blamed Stephen Feinberg, his deputy, for the shortages and for not ensuring that Mr. Trump was aware of the issue. Meanwhile, people inside the Pentagon said, well, the reason this happened is because nobody wants, Hegseth is just a mini-me version of Trump. He doesn't want to hear any bad news. And if he hears bad news, you are the problem. And his response is to shoot the messenger rather than fix the problem. Same thing with Trump. And so the reality is that they said, we think that the department really was hiding this information from Hegseth and Trump because sharing bad news or even realistic views doesn't seem to end well for anybody. You don't want to tell them what they don't want to hear. Trump expressed frustration that the Pentagon's munitions shortfall was affecting whether or not he could expand his operation in Iran. Yeah, the only thing that is restraining him is that he doesn't have enough weapons. And that's a good thing. Meanwhile, we have Joe Kent pointing out that the real issue in all of this is the fact that Israel simply wants chaos.
So they would come with like a series of plans, and look, none of their plans I don't think were serious, because I think the Israelis are a very serious intelligence service, and the plans that they were presenting, they weren't serious, but they wanted, the goal of the plan was to make it look like they had a plan. Their plan all along has been chaos and to get us bought into the chaos. They're okay with having to mow the grass in Iran indefinitely, especially as long as we pay for it, we fight for it, and we bleed for it. So they would come and they would say things like, and you're seeing this in the news, and I don't think any of it actually even got off the ground, like, oh, we'll have the Kurds do it. Well, have you ever looked at a map? I mean, the Kurdish region in Iran, it's not like the Kurdish region in Iraq, which the Kurdish region in Iraq is big, but it's still not that big. Like we couldn't overthrow Saddam with just the Kurds. We tried in 91. It didn't work. Mm-hmm. So same thing here. You had people going and saying like, oh, we have a plan with like the Kurds. And it's like, okay, this isn't a serious plan, guys. And then you'd hear other nonsense about like the MEK. And then there was a report the other day about the Baluch separatists on the Pakistan border. Mm-hmm. I mean, none of these are serious plans, but there was enough of a media, I think, push, and then a push from the Israeli government to say that like, oh no, sir, we actually do have a plan. If we kill the Ayatollah and when you guys do a weeks long air campaign, you see the protesters on the streets, that will automatically then translate to these people overthrowing their government and installing, a pro-Western government, which to me, this is why these things were never said like very seriously to us, because it's like, guys, we've tried this before.
We've tried it.
Like, we've tried this over and over again, and it never works. And then the Iran factor, just how old, Persia is, you kill the supreme leader, like it makes it exponentially more impossible of a scenario. But they would come and they would brief like they had a plan. That was even for a while there. You heard people talking about installing the Shah's son back in the country.
Yeah. Put the Shah of Iran's son back in. That's one thing that all Iranians agree on. They don't want anything to do with the Shah. And that's where this all began, if you remember. It wasn't, 47 years ago It all began 73 years ago when we overthrew their government and put in a king with a secret police, a totalitarian secret police. Well, what is the cost to American taxpayers? Hegseth asked legislators to approve another $67 billion of extra defense spending. This is on top of the record $1 trillion budget that he's playing with. He claimed the conflict had already cost $37 trillion. However, the true cost of the war, from people who have looked at this honestly, places the figure closer to now $151 billion, more than 4 times higher than what War Pete is lying about here. So, again, think about the cynical attitude, and we've heard this. I played multiple times clips of people in Israel talking about mowing the grass. What they're talking about is mowing down people and just engaging in a program of genocide like they're doing in Gaza. That's mowing the grass to them. Think about how cynical and evil that is, especially when they have determined that we're the ones who need to pay for mowing the grass and die for mowing the grass for them. It's a disregarding of human life, not only of the people that are their enemies, but also of their people that are supposedly their greatest ally, the U.S. So as all of this is happening, Trump had put out a peace plan for Gaza. Netanyahu is not having any of it, though. He's demanding full disarmament of Hamas before withdrawing. Now, I want you to think about this. The people who have told us over and over again that Iran has no more military weapons, right? We've heard that from Trump, and we've heard it from all the Zionist mouthpieces like Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and all the rest of them. We've heard over and over again, well, they got nothing left. We've decimated their military. They got no bombs, missiles, their Navy is gone if they ever had one. The Air Force, if they ever had one, that's all gone. And the same people are telling you that Iran has no weapons, are telling you that Hamas is loaded with weapons. Neither of these things could be further from the truth, right? I mean, it's just amazing how far away they are. But why are we in this situation? Well, because we have people who are completely owned by Israel, like Senator Fetterman, for example.
For you could agree with them 90%, but Israel is the red line.
Absolutely. Israel for me. Like, I can't ever turn my back to Israel after.
Pretty well on the U.S.
So, and I mean no disrespect on this, but that is not our country.
Why is Israel, another country, your red line right now? This is what your critics are saying, rather than a domestic issue that impacts Americans' everyday lives.
I think Wolf Blitzer used to work for AIPAC, and he's challenging Fetterman, right? And Jon Stewart's having to explain, that this isn't for Jewish Americans. Israel's a different country. And it's not clear that Fetterman does know that. Julian,
isn't that amazing? That's Ink Uger. But both Jon Stewart and Wolf Blitzer are both Jewish. As he pointed out, Wolf Blitzer worked for AIPAC. And they can't believe what Fetterman is doing here. It's just like Lindsey Graham. Lindsey is not alone. As a matter of fact, there was a meme that Lance showed me, and it was like a recapping of Lindsey's life. He spends his entire life trying to get us to go to war with Iran. We go to war with Iran. He sees us losing, and then he dies. But, of course, it's not just John Fetterman. It's not just Donald Trump or Lindsey Graham. It's also people like this Congressman, Jeremy Moss.
Honestly, I would say that the entire purpose of my campaign is to make sure America continues to support Israel. I don't think it's wrong for Jews in America to want to live in Israel first. America is not our homeland. We have been victims of anti-Semitism here.
How open they are about infiltration. They're openly just using us.
Yeah, that's right. He says America's not our homeland. We've been used in many different ways. And so now they're going to use us. They justify that. They're going to use the Goyim. So the president made the bombshell announcement that Hamas has finally agreed to lay down its weapons. Again, Netanyahu says, no, we got to get all of their weapons. We got to make sure that there's nobody that is armed there. We got to make sure that nobody is alive is basically it. The same people telling you that Iran has no weapons are telling you that Hamas is armed to the teeth after years of bombing civilians there. So during a cabinet meeting on Sunday, Netanyahu said Israel rejects the 15-point document from Trump's Board of Peace. He said, we will continue to thwart threats against our forces and citizens. We're talking about real disarmament, not fictional disarmament. This is a fictional, farcical threat that he's talking about. How in the world can he claim that there is a credible threat coming from Gaza after, how long has it been? 3 years nearly? It'll be 3 years in just a couple of months of constant bombarding, of targeted assassination of children. He said, Americans have ideas, some of which are acceptable to us and some are not, said Netanyahu, our greatest ally. And we know how to stand up to those things, said Netanyahu, our greatest ally, by the way. Don't ever forget that. So as Joe Kent pointed out, the plan all along has been chaos. They want to create chaos in the Middle East. They want everybody fighting each other while they step back and collect the checks and then come in afterwards and take the land. So meanwhile, Iran is setting conditions for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. And this is why everybody says, not a chance, Hormuz opens. Nacho. Iran on Saturday laid out sweeping demands to the U.S. The National Security Council member, the secretary of it, said on Saturday that reopening the strait would require Washington to lift its naval blockade and sanctions, to withdraw U.S. military forces from the region, to pay war reparations. This is going to be the thing that kills it. And to release frozen Iranian assets. I think all of that is doable except for the war reparations. One way they could compromise on that would be to say, well, we'll consider it to be war reparations to let you collect tolls on the Strait of Hormuz, because they're going to wind up doing it anyway. This would be a way for you to say, well, they didn't do that on their own. We gave them the ability to do that, and then that would settle the war reparations as well. But, of course, that isn't going to happen. They also call for an end on the U.S. attacks on Iran's regional allies and against threats against Iran. So get control of your Truth Social. According to the interim deal, the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed in June, the U.S. and Iran, they had a schedule to end sanctions, and a compensation plan would be part of the final deal. They said negotiations to address frozen assets, the end of a 60-day period that was agreed to negotiate this final deal, will come in just over a week. Somebody needs to clue in CNBC and let them know that the MOU is deader than a doornail. Meanwhile, Iran said it's close to reaching a deal with Oman to manage the strait. The two countries, they said, are close to reaching an agreement on navigation, specifically on the determination of a transit route. So they said they need to get this agreement before they'll move forward. Meanwhile, they said what we're seeing here is theater diplomacy on a loop. Massive attack coming. Wait, never mind. They want to negotiate. And so they're actually laughing at Trump. They're saying the quiet part out loud. Everybody is laughing about Trump for doing this type of thing, but they are saying it out loud. It's the taco, nacho, and we have to pay for all this. That's where the burritos come in that we can't afford. We'll be right back, folks.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Hello, it's me, Volodymyr Zelensky. I'm so tired of wearing these same t-shirts everywhere for years. You'd think with all the billions I've skimmed off America, I could dress better. And I could, if only David Knight would send me one of his beautiful gray MacGuffin hoodies or a new black t-shirt with the MacGuffin logo in blue. But he told me to get lost. Maybe one of you American suckers can buy me some at thedavidknightshow.com. You should be able to buy me several hundred. Those amazing sand-colored microphone hoodies are so beautiful. I'd wear something other than green military cosplay to my various galas and social events. If you want to save on shipping, just put it in the next package of bombs and missiles coming from the USA.
Yeah, that's right. We need to make that a household word MacGuffin. Just as the listener sent this tombstone, actually, that was their real name, MacGuffin. But we need to get the understanding as put out by Hitchcock. Actually, one of his cinematographers, I think, came up with that. Get people to understand that it's never about what they say it's about. They're just trying to motivate you in a particular way. It is a propaganda technique. And we need to understand what is happening with that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the mountains of propaganda that have been headed our way in just a moment here when we come back to it. But I want to thank Radis Bro. Thank you very much for the tip on Rumble. He said, so many major issues hitting Americans at once. How can we focus on retribution from COVID when they lie about a dead McConnell, when they ignore the cries to stop endless wars? The amount of taxation is endless. Yeah, it is endless, and it is shameless. They shamelessly lie to us to our face. As a matter of fact, when we go back and we look at Mitch McConnell, I played for you last week several of the staff that were being interrogated by reporters in the congressional building and asking them, these are people who are communications directors. So first they talked to the primary communications director person, and she just smiles cynically and doesn't say a word, and neither did her boss, the senior communications guy. And it gets worse than that. When you look at what is happening with AutoPen Mitch, you've got people there who are making huge salaries. They're making $200,000 a year. As a matter of fact, Terry Carmack reportedly makes $226,850 per year, ignores any questions at the senator's residence after he was reportedly discharged from rehab. He entered the hospital about 60 days ago. And so they've gone for 60 consecutive Senate roll call votes without representation, roll calls between 172 through 231. And as one person was saying, Kentucky deserves representation. But the key thing is the GOP needs to recover its integrity. They don't realize just how deeply they are burying their integrity. How do they ever get that back? Because it's not, Mitch McConnell, he can't help what his health is. But it's the GOP leadership in both the House and the Senate, the president, and so many of these other people who claim that they have had 20-minute discussions with him. It's absolutely idiotic what they are saying and totally unbelievable. As a matter of fact, here's an example of this. Here's one of Mitch's staff. I think this is the director who is making $250,000.
I read that McConnell's been discharged. Are you guys going to release a video of him, though, just to kind of quell any of the speculation or any of the rumors online?
Not going to talk to you, not going to look at you. Going to run into the elevator, run away.
So just wondering what you're going to do next.
Yeah, we're all wondering what you're going to do. Are you guys running this thing to keep your jobs? What is going on with this? And again, why isn't anybody calling this out?
Ma'am, can you tell us anything about the senator's condition? Do you think you should release a video to the public? Why hasn't he done that yet? Just a short video to talk to the public and address them?
This is all done by Nicholas Balassi.
When do you think
he's been following these staffers along.
Do you think he'll return by September?
Yeah, we don't know when he's going to be resurrected. And again, just understand, these are the same people who, in the face of all the reports from EMS at the time, he had 911 call. They have not released that 911 call, whoever it was that found him in the house. They said they found him unconscious. So they dispatched, advanced life support there. They reported we do have the conversations on the other side of this. We do know what the 911 EMS people did. They did CPR on him for an extended period of time. They removed him unconscious. They had advanced life support there. And they put down in their dispatch report that it was cardiac arrest. Then the staff comes along and says, oh, no, none of that happened. He just had a bad fall, and he was unconscious when they took him out, but he's recovering in rehab. They're just lying to you, folks. Same thing that's happening with Scott Bessent. On Friday, he said that the Strait of Hormuz could reopen under a 30 to 60-day ceasefire as soon as today or tomorrow. That would have been Friday or Saturday. Did not happen, did it? I see a comment here from Audi Modern Retro Radio, and his podcast is all a lie, damn it. And it certainly is, Audi, isn't it? Modern Retro Radio says, looks like Mossad has the goods on McConnell's staff, too. Well, who knows what their motive? I mean, many people have said, well, they don't want to have a special election because they're afraid that Massey might win it or a Democrat might win it, so they're playing this game to run the clock out. Well, that was a week or so ago. That was August the 3rd was the deadline for that. And they did not, at that point, he could have miraculously been declared dead. But they keep the game going. So now a lot of people are saying, is it because these people are making so much money? Because the staff is making a tremendous amount of money, and they won't make that if Mitch McConnell is gone. Who knows what they're up to? As a matter of fact, when you look at some of this stuff, some of the proxy votes he cannot do, but he did do a proxy vote, or somebody did it for him, in terms of some things that came before the Agricultural Committee that he is chair of, but absent from. Epstein Island says on Rumble, it says Trump arrested Maduro in Venezuela, and then he stole the oil. The money from the stolen oil is going to his private account in Qatar. The corruption is unreal. Yeah, it truly is. I mean, it is real corruption, but it is unbelievable that it could be this bad and this public and this in your face, and that nothing would be done about it. Iran's foreign ministry is declaring victory now, saying that in the face of the world's most expensive military. Well, that's a good way to characterize it. So now people are not talking about it as the world's most feared military, but the world's most expensive military. I think that's a good way to understand this. Meanwhile, where is the opening of Hormuz, as Bessent said was going to happen on Friday or Saturday? No, instead, on Saturday, they put out another statement on the Iranian side saying that they are not done with this yet. They're going to hold out until they get what they want, which is compensation for the initiation of a war. Like Trump's latest comments on Thursday night, Bessent seems in mission accomplished mode with his newly published interview. Yeah, well, as they pointed out, it's just diplomacy theater on a loop. And who is their audience? Well, the fact that you got Scott Bessent out there talking about Treasury Secretary talking about this. That is highly, when you look at the war, there are tremendous economic consequences for it, but really his audience is Wall Street. And they're eagerly accepting everything these guys say, no matter how many times they lie to them. Trump's comments to reporters in the Oval Office Thursday evening are surprising, given that instead of reacting angrily and outright condemning the Iranian-Oman plan to control the Strait of Hormuz, his reaction was somewhat muted and meager. He said, well, I think it's going to end pretty soon. I don't think they can go much longer. So who is the they? Is that Europe and the U.S. and people who need the oil, or is it the Iranians? Both sides are hurting from this because that's what happens with war. It's absolutely unnecessary. Have you reached a deal to open the Strait of Hormuz, he was asked. He says, well, it's sort of open right now. Remember that? Remember when Hegseth was asked that question? He says, well, I mean, it's open as long as they don't shoot at you. This is... It's like there's not a rope across it or anything, but you might have your ship sunk and shot at. But yeah, it's basically open, right? Tehran has wised up and pointed out that the Pentagon used these interim periods of no fighting to just rearm, reposition, and ramp up the military supply flights into the region. And so they're not interested in it anymore. They said This is how they, well, I'm sorry, this is not them. This is Joe Kent again, saying it's a good first step toward an exit. But he said Trump can end this by pulling our troops and ships out of the region now, deprive Iran of targets to hit and the leverage that they need to escalate. Trump says we've won, therefore we can bring them home, right? I mean, you know, he doesn't claim that he changed the regime, but he does claim that he ended their nuclear program. That is the one sticking point that supposedly we've got to stay there for. That's what Netanyahu was lying to everybody about for 30 plus years. The nuclear program that we had to stop. They're always just 2 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Well, now you can't make that credible threat anymore unless they admit that Trump was lying many times about this. So either Trump is indeed preparing to go bigger, or this is belatedly the final cut and run moment that probably the majority of American public has been hoping for. That's right. Just make it the Iran war. Iran away. And it's the best thing he can do, because the longer he stays here, the more it's going to be an embarrassment to him and to the empire. The deadly alternative to simply declaring an exit to an eventual introduction of ground troops. Thankfully, Trump officials have continued to, by and large, condemn this as a legitimate scenario, in spite of the fact that you've got the loony people who are Zionist shills, people like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, saying just the opposite.
I'll fight them to the last American. Die for Israel.
Yeah, that's really where they're coming from. Iran is remaining defiant. It's in the driver's seat with the ability to wage asymmetric warfare against a much larger U.S. foe, which is, and this is key, this is what Zero Hedge says, and I agree with this, confused as to what to do next. That is the one thing that comes out of the Trump regime White House. Confusion. Confused about what to do next. Do I do something that the American public wants, or do I do something that Netanyahu wants? I'm confused. I can't really figure out what to do. Do I double down on a winless war, or do I declare victory and go home? I can't figure out what to do. Iran insists the U.S. must meet stringent list of demands before Hormuz opens. Iran is pressing hard to extract from Washington everything that it can get at a moment that the Trump White House seems to be backing down from a heightened war. Trump and his officials have remained surprisingly quiet, even as it has emerged that the deal outline is wholly favorable to Tehran's conditions. So they said that on Friday, as they were talking about this, they said their scheme that they've put together with Oman and that Oman and Iran have put together for the management of the Strait of Hormuz, they said enemy countries, in other words, the U.S. and Israel, may only transit the waterway after lifting sanctions and paying compensation for the war. Perhaps that's what Trump was talking about when he said, well, it's kind of open anyway. Open to everybody but us. U.S. and Israeli-linked ships are currently banned and will be fired upon, said Iran. But I didn't think they had any missiles left. The White House stayed mum even after that and didn't openly push back, nor did Trump fire off any angry truth social messages. So this is all good news. Hopefully somebody has talked some sense to him and gotten him away from Netanyahu, but I wouldn't bet on it. And I wouldn't bet that it would last either. While the dropping of sanctions seems to be realistic, part of the deal that will end the war, that is to get the Trump administration to pay compensation and reparations, that is a non-starter, I think. The Iranians, no doubt, will smell weakness and blood in the water as the U.S. bombs have fallen silent now for over a week. After Trump reversed course from Taco last weekend on the planned harder strikes. I mean, he's so out of touch with reality of what is even happening in the military because people are afraid to give him any bad news. And so he was out there blowing his trumpet, saying this is going to be the biggest thing we've seen since World War II. Bigger even than that, right? And then all of a sudden nothing happens. And then it comes out, well, it turns out that they don't have the ammunition to pull this off anymore. Besant strongly suggested that the Hormuz Straits reopening was imminent. It was going to be on Friday or Saturday. No such thing happened. Iranian officials had hinted on Saturday that the reopening of the strait was not imminent. Iran is in essence saying this ain't over, and they want to extract their promises, their pound of flesh, as they put it here, also to ensure that it is never attacked again. Well, good luck with that. The Iranian president has said the war must end at some point, and that his country is determined to adopt the Memorandum of Understanding as a basis, provided the U.S. abandons the atmosphere of distrust that is created. That's right. And you talk about burning credibility. I mean, everything that they say, everything that they do, just exhibits corruption, never-ending corruption. Well, we're going to take a quick break, folks, and we will be right back. I want to talk about something that is happening at the local and personal level. When we look at our families and our families' lives and about education, it's something we should all think about. We'll be right back.
The globalists' next move. And now, the David Knight Show.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at this. We have a couple. This is in Durham. It was reported by LifeSite News, Durham, South Carolina. There is no Durham, South Carolina. It's in North Carolina. And the Durham that I know in North Carolina was part of the Triangle area where we lived, and they are radically Democrat there. They had a situation where a couple tried to kill their 31-week-old baby, preborn, right? It's before birth, but it's 31 terms through 36 or whatever. So nearly a full-term baby. The county prosecutor hinted that she might find a way to reduce the charge due to her own support for the killing of innocent preborn babies via abortion. So this is the Durham police have alleged that she took mifepristone, I call it Mephistopheles, and an attempt to terminate her pregnancy early, caused her child to be born at 31 weeks at a weight under 5.5 pounds. Again, when you look at this is one of the reasons why they talk about, well, we're concerned about the health and life of the mother. No, you're not. Not if you're going to let them self-administer drugs without a medical exam. The reason that they would have medical exams before this was to look at the condition of the mother and to look at the size of the baby. That represents a real serious issue for most women if it's too large. Johnson is charged with assault, inflicting serious bodily injury on an unborn child, and assault with a deadly weapon with an intent to kill. The child's father was also charged. The couple reportedly bought the abortion drugs from Virginia and gave birth on the toilet. The couple then called the police, and the baby was brought to the hospital, but later died. Now, in the same article, it says the baby appears to be alive, but they also say the baby died. So I'm not sure. If it was the baby died, I would think that they would be charged with murder, not just with assault to inflict serious bodily injury. So I think the baby survived, but it's not clear about that. But both the prosecutor and the public defender appear to be on the same side. So questions could be raised about whether or not justice will be served. It's kind of like when Trump sues himself, right? Or he sues his own administration. And there isn't really any two sides to the lawsuit. Well, there's no two sides to this prosecution either, because the prosecutor doesn't want to enforce the law protecting life. Statute does require that the alleged victim be living at the time of the assault, she said. In order to be living, one must be born, said the public defender. Is that really the case? You don't think the child is alive? Many children have survived when they're born 10 weeks earlier than this. That's an absolute lie. And of course, the DA comes down with a tried and true lie. I've been on record saying that I support the right to choose and right to make decisions about a woman's own body. To which we all say, of course, that is somebody else. Half the time, that body is a different sex and gender than you are as a mother. It always has its own unique DNA. It is somebody else. That is not your body. So Students for Life of America said every time we're told that chemical abortion pills are, quote, just another prescription, remember this story. Yes, you should. As a matter of fact, when we look at this, here is another example of what is happening in schools. This is a dad suing after school allegedly will not say if biological males can use his daughter's bathroom. This is also taking place in North Carolina. The father alleges the school district's refusal to disclose this information violates his First Amendment rights and his due process rights. Well, it doesn't violate his First Amendment rights, but he is not exercising his parental rights. And so this is a situation, when you look at what is happening in schools, and you look at the massive gaslighting that is happening there, think about the fact that he's putting his child in this environment. The only thing he's worried about, and I understand the concern about having, women are dressing or undressing, whatever, you got a male there that's doing the same thing. I understand that concern. However, even if that is not a concern, consider what is happening when you've got the principals of two different schools. So he complained about both his daughter and his son, and both of the principals said, just go away. We are going to support our transgender kids. Well, what is it like when you put your child in that kind of an environment? Why would you subject them to an institution where the people have bought into this insanity, not only bought into it, but they want to honor and to celebrate it? And we're just looking at a report, I saw some of it last night. It was a kid who was talking about, maybe you've heard of this, the GATE program, Gifted and Talented program. This is something that came out of, had a lot of similarity to Project Stargate that was done by the military. This is when they got into their occultic stuff. And as part of this GATE program, this kid was in it, and he did a report about it. He's got a YouTube channel that he does reports on. He said, I hadn't really talked about my own personal experience, but he said there were a lot of people that were talking about the GATE program, and they couldn't remember anything about it except that they were in it. And they had this strange amnesia about what happened. None of them could remember it. And Lance was the one who saw this. He said, I went down through all the comments. A lot of people were saying, yeah, we had this thing. The only thing I can remember is that they gave us this pink drink that tasted like bubble gum. That's the only thing I can remember about it. But I can't remember what we did in the class. And he pointed out that this started 1 year after they stopped MK Ultra. And they stated in their documents that have now been released that they were looking for children who had, when they say talent and gifted, they mean talented and gifted in things like mind reading, the Ghostbusters, the beginning of that, where you got Bill Murray and he's got the cards that have squiggly lines on it or a star or this or that. And he goes, so what am I thinking about? And it's that type of thing. And teaching them to do astral projection and stuff like that. Literally the occult. As a matter of fact, it's said in the documents that they would introduce them to tarot cards and to Ouija boards and things like that. That's what they're doing in school. When you stop and think about how satanic and how occult the schools are, even in these GATE programs started in 1974. And a lot of people remember it, even if they weren't in it. They remember that there were these GATE people. As a matter of fact, Travis's wife was saying, yeah, I remember they had this program, and the GATE people would come there. They didn't teach anything else. They would just come for that particular thing, and then they go, and we never see them. They were not a part of the staff. They were something that was very different that would come in. She was not a part of the program. But these people who did it, they said, I found some papers that said, here's one where they were teaching me Russian or something. I have no recollection of that. The interesting thing is that Department of Education document talking about Ouija boards and tarot cards was from 1988. Now, remember, the Department of Education was created by Jimmy Carter in 1980 during the campaign between Carter and Reagan. Reagan immediately said, I'm going to get rid of that. Instead, he kept it going. And here in 1988, he was president. And after 8 years, not only had the Department of Education grown, but now the Department of Education was pushing a program in schools across the country to introduce the kids to hypnosis. They actually had documents there saying, we found that, found that kids are much more susceptible to hypnosis than adults are. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why they're pushing all this transgender stuff on them. They're susceptible to propaganda. They're susceptible to hypnosis. They're susceptible to many types of things. And when you look at a government institution that's talking about how easy it is to hypnotize kids, doesn't that raise any alarms with anybody? I mean, it's absolutely
ding,
insane.
ding, ding, red alert, danger, Will Robinson.
Why are you taking my kid and putting them in this GATE program? And again, Project Stargate, and there were several different things that had GATE in the term that happened at the time, and they were all about the occult. We look at that. But of course, when we look at what is happening in the schools, one of the reasons that this is happening is because we're not really paying attention to what our kids are doing, and we're not paying attention to really what our responsibility is as parents. Like I said before, when you're trying to accommodate these various programs and this kind of pagan sexuality, and you're doing that in the schools, we need to do something in terms of not just sending your kids to live amongst them and to learn from them. Again, this is a mentoring program. I've had parents tell me back in the day when I said, why would you put your kid in this type of situation? It doesn't make any sense at all to me. Oh, well, we're putting them in to be salt and light to the world. It's like, no, you're putting them in battle. Why would you send your kids off to fight wars for yourself? Especially kids that are elementary school age. And that's really what is happening here. So in this particular situation, North Carolina father is suing the child's districts, 2 different schools. One of them is in elementary school. The other one is in high school. So 4th grade is his daughter. The son is in high school. And so they responded and said, well, we can't tell you anything about this because we can't reveal any information about a single child. And said, all we're asking is if the bathrooms are accessible to these kids. And they said his daughter, who appears to already be having an effect on her, she said, well, personally, I'm a girl. And that just struck me as odd. Personally, I'm a girl. That's my personal choice to be a girl. Of course, you may choose to be a boy if you are a girl, but I'm personally a girl, and so I think it's inappropriate. What you need to do is retreat back to the understanding that I've said for the longest time, the answer to LGBT agenda is BOB, Bob. It is binary, objective, and binary. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Welcome back. And as we were talking about the father who wants to know whether or not they're going to allow transgenders into the girls' bathroom, he ought to ask, what are they telling them in the classroom, and why are they defending this? That's the real issue that's there. It's not just one person that's doing this. It's not just the 2 principals that are doing this. And it's not just about the bathrooms. This is something that is institutionalized. This place is a cuckoo's nest. You don't need to fly over it and drop your kid off. you need to fly them out of it. The elementary school principal said that because matters involving individual students are confidential, we cannot confirm, disclose, or provide advance notice regarding the status, identity, or accommodations of any particular student. He said, we're not asking for that. He said, we're just asking what your policy is, and you won't tell us. Isn't that a red flag? Yeah. Yeah, they really are manipulating these kids, no doubt about it. So he filed suit over it. He says he is a practicing Christian. His religious beliefs include that sex is immutable, that his children should not be expected to undress or to use restrooms in the presence of members of the opposite sex. The lawsuit does not allege that he knows biological male has used his daughter's bathroom. His attorneys argue that he cannot determine whether that has happened or whether that is permitted to happen. Again, I just got to say that the appropriate response, as Alex Newman has said, and I've repeated many times, when you see the school building is on fire, first you get your child out of there, then you try to put out the fire, right? You need to try to shut down these institutions that are pushing stuff like this. But first get your kid out of there. If it's important to you, then the school is going to teach these kids exactly the opposite of what is important to you. You're telling your kids that you're a Christian, and because we're Christians, we believe that sex is immutable, that it's biological, that it is objective, and that it is binary. Well, if you really want your kids to believe that, don't put them somewhere where they're going to teach them exactly the opposite of that constantly. And so when we look at what is happening with this, it is beyond the bathroom. And you don't want your kids taught and mentored by somebody who normalizes this, who is antithetical to everything that you believe. The interesting thing, I think, is that this is reported by Fox, and they just want the system to be trusted, right? This is like what we see with RFK Jr. He says, well, I'm here to restore trust in the system. Well, that's what the lawsuit is about. It's there to restore trust in the system. Oh, look, they're going to tell me, they promise, that if they put a tranny in my girl's bathroom, well, they won't even tell the parents what this kid is doing at school. How could you possibly trust them? He says he ultimately seeks advance notice and a meaningful opportunity to opt his children out. Well, here's your meaningful opportunity to opt them out. It's called homeschool. He said before they're expected or required to use intimate facilities in the presence of a member of the opposite sex.
Opt them out now.
Yeah.
The fact that they are obfuscating this, the fact they are fighting you on this, the fact they won't tell you should tell you what they're up to, that they're up to something sinister.
That's right. And where does this all come from? You know, there was an interesting article about the PC USA, and this is where Tallarico is attending a seminary. And this is on World Magazine by Carl Truman. He said it is a cheap knockoff of paganism. He said a PC USA, Presbyterian Church USA, study on pastoral monogamy has all the markings of a denomination's long slide into irrelevance. He said progressive Christianity attempts to baptize the values of the wider secular culture, and it's constantly hoped that it can gain the respect of the world around it and maintain some vague form of Christian idiom for doing so. And isn't this exactly what this father is doing? You know, he is hoping that they can maintain some vague understanding of what Christian morality, what Christian understanding of God's creation is, and the picture of marriage, what that pictures for us as Christians. He's hoping that that can be kept even in this pagan environment when he sends children into it. We've had Tallarico basically say, I hate Christianity. And so he's saying that because he wants people to like him. And that's exactly what this denomination that he goes to seminary with is doing. The denomination submitted a motion that ordained clergy should only be involved in sexual relationships that are monogamous. Is that what Christ said? Nothing of the sort. He said these relationships can be between persons of any gender, but are to be faithful relationships. So the debates about marriage and sexuality, writes Carl Truman, are not simply concerned with what it means to be human. It is the reconstruction of marriage to suit gays and now queer politics that has an implication for how we understand such things as what a man is, what a woman is, what a family is. children, love, and commitment, the same-sex couples are now driving much of the surrogacy industry, just like Scott Bessent and his so-called husband. It becomes clear that gay marriage has intensified the commodification of women and of children. The Bible makes it clear that marriage is the central analogy of the relationship between Christ and his church. And so when you distort that, when you distort marriage, it is distorting that theology. This applies as well to physically abusive marriages. It also applies to marriages that are torn apart by infidelity. When a church decides that marriage is something that is fluid, that it should be conformed to cultural tastes or sexual desires, or even when a church decides that the institution is so confusing that it needs study committees to work it out. If monogamy is something to be required of ordained ministers, then the game is up. The confusion in the PCUSA is one more sign that it is slowly but surely becoming shamelessly pagan. And by the way, just think about our schools when you say all this stuff. It's not just about a church denomination. In 1990, he points out, Camille Paglia, remember Rush Limbaugh used to love Camille Paglia. She wrote a review entitled The Joy of Presbyterian Sex. And she said that it didn't celebrate the Presbyterian statement at the time, 36 years ago, was trying to compromise at that point in time. She said it doesn't celebrate pagan sensuality. She said it sought to accommodate it to a Christian idiom, losing thereby both the rigor of Christianity and the paganism. So to paraphrase what she had to say, her conclusion was, be Christian or just go away. The Presbyterianism is tediously irrelevant. And I say that is the situation that we see with education. It starts with the children at a very young age. We're going to take a quick break, folks, and we will be right back. Stay with us.
Making sense common again. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Welcome back. I want to get to some of the comments we've had here for a while here. Hero May says, I remember that gate, they used to put us in a dark room with people from the military. Yeah, that's exactly what he was saying. He said he didn't say there were people in the military. He couldn't remember much of anything about it, except he knew that he was in it. Like I said, some of the people had some of the materials that they brought home with them. And this one girl says, they were teaching me Russian? I don't remember anything about that. But yeah, astral projection. It just shows you how dark and sinister our government has become when the military is involved in this kind of occultic stuff. That's why I call the Pentagon the pentagram many times, because that's where DARPA and a lot of this stuff has begun. Marky Mark, thank you for the tip. He says, Dave, Congress needs to get rid of these departments. One, the Democrats controlled both houses until 1986. In 1986, the GOP got the Senate. The GOP didn't go along with Reagan eliminating the Department of Education. That's right. Or the Department of Energy or any of these other departments that were recent creations. And there's no basis for them in the Constitution, of course. And when we look at what happens with these different organizations, look at the war on drugs, for example, right? When we talk about civil asset forfeiture, the fact that they can confiscate your car, your home, your cash, your business, whatever. We've had situations where there was a guy who had an air taxi and he flew a couple of people into Canada. They were businessmen in suits carrying briefcases. When he gets back, his plane is surrounded when he lands in the U.S. And these two guys are arrested and they seize his plane. He says, what's going on? I didn't have anything to do with it. Oh, we know you didn't have anything to do with it, but your plane was an accessory in this drug deal, so we're seizing it from you. He had to fight them for years, but it put him out of business and bankrupted him because that was his only way that he could keep his business going. And so they confiscate stuff and then tell you that you've got to sue them in court. Where did that come from? Well, that came from the way the IRS operates. When you look at these bureaucracies and think about how the IRS operates, they do not give you due process, a presumption of innocence, none of that stuff. And then, of course, neither do these bureaucracies that are involved in civil asset forfeiture. And it's not just the drug agency, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA. It's also the FCC and many others will do the same type of thing. They'll confiscate assets from you and then tell you that you got to sue them in court and prove that you're innocent to get it back. This is the way these things operate. They say that because these are rules created by bureaucrats, that they are not laws that are enacted by your representatives. And because they're not laws enacted by your representatives, because Congress doesn't do that anymore, you have no protection under the Bill of Rights. That is the legal fiction, and it is a lie. Everything they tell us is a lie, isn't it? Whackjaw says, Flock Safety faces growing scrutiny after reports linked one of its major investors to Israeli cyber firm Toka, which can hack security cameras and manipulate video footage. That's right. They can do it live or they can do archived footage. And we look at this. I talked about this last week, Toka, T-O-K-A. Why would somebody do that? And how would they use that, right? Why would you have a firm that would want to alter security footage, both live and archived? And to what end might they do this? Well, I think obviously they're going to use it to create false criminal charges against some people. They'll use it to cover up criminal charges for other people. Think about the Epstein class. This is coming from Israel, and so is all the Epstein stuff. So maybe, if you go and you find this archived footage somewhere, they can clean this thing up. They can put somebody else in that video or take you out of that video. That's the purpose of all this stuff. Birdhouse Blues, it's official. Mitch is older than any barrel of bourbon in Kentucky. Yeah, except that I don't know if he's aging that well.
I think Mitch may have stopped aging.
I don't know, yeah. Epstein Island, I still can't believe that Trump pardoned Jonathan Pollard and flew him to Israel 6 years ago. Yeah, well, it was Miriam Adelson's plane that he flew on, and I've played the clip where he comes down the walkway from the plane. He kisses the ground, and Netanyahu is there to meet Miriam Adelson, the greatest donor to Trump, and Jonathan Pollard, the greatest traitor to America, being honored and greeted by Satan Yahoo, our greatest ally. You believe any of that stuff? Man, it's just crazy. MQH8HM. If anybody would have told me years ago that somebody would be rooting for Iran, I would have told them that they were insane. That's right. There's not any good guys in this war, unfortunately, but there are principles that need to be obeyed. The idea that we do not initiate wars against people that have not attacked us. The idea that we do not focus on civilian populations, that we don't make vain threats, even if they are vain, and even worse if there's a possibility that it's not a vain threat, vain threats to wipe out a civilization and to focus on attacking civilian infrastructure. Folks, these are open war crimes that are being committed by Trump. And he began all this stuff in Venezuela. He and War Pete attacking boats without knowing if they're alleged drug traffickers. Well, they don't know that until they stop them. And again, there are very detailed procedures that the U.S. military still follows to identify whether or not these are real drug traffickers. And if they are drug traffickers, they don't line them up on the side of the boat and execute them. In most cases, they don't even bother to arrest them. And yet he's killing people that are suspect. I just look at him and just, and if they don't kill him, they circle back around and violate international law and the rules of war, even though this is not really a declared war, and execute them in the water. To me, that was the most heinous thing. And so, of course, when Trump does that, and not only gets away with it, but he is filled with pride at his ability to do that without losing any American lives, then he is ripe for the pickings. And I think Lindsey Graham understood that and worked with Netanyahu at that point in time. Jerry Alatalo says, Trump to staff, give me any bad news and you're in big trouble. By the way, the beatings shall continue until morale improves. That's right. When you have this, when you create this sycophantic attitude, and we have seen the public meetings with his cabinet where as he goes around, he lets each of them speak, they all have to begin with this obeisance to him. They all have to begin by flattering him and praising him and so forth. It's disgusting to watch this. That is the environment. You flatter this guy. You don't give him any bad news. You don't give him any news that's going to contradict with what he wishes was reality. And that's a very dangerous situation. And you can see where that is right now. I hope it doesn't get any more dangerous. I hope he doesn't get it in his head that he's going to put boots on the ground, that he's going to follow the insane advice of Mark Levin and send the Marines into Carg Island. People who are retired military and honest have talked about what a suicide mission that would be. First of all, you were going to be under withering fire from the mainland as you're trying to get into the island. Once you take that over, how do you resupply those people? It's just a stupid suicide mission. And yet Mark Levin is pounding the desk, demanding that we do that for Israel. I wish he would go back there to live. Harrison Fayer says, if there was such a thing as a transgender identity, quote unquote, additional bathrooms for these types would have been installed from the beginning, but they weren't. Why? Well, because they're only male and female. Good point. We never had hermaphrodite bathrooms, which is people who are biologically have elements of both sexes in them. That's not what we're talking about with transgender. And I think it's also kind of crazy that, you remember we had, when all the LGBT stuff started at its inception, they were talking about the fact, well, it's got to be biological and physical and genetic, the fact that you're homosexual. And I said at the time, I said, well, we all have different different predilections to certain things, right? And we have, some people are drawn to alcoholism, other people are drawn to sexual sins and things like that. But that doesn't mean that it is inevitable. We are more than just our genes. If we're not, we're simply animals. And so I didn't think that there was a gay gene, but they immediately pivot from that to say, well, genes don't make any sense, any difference at all. The physical nature of what you are, your physical reality is just something that we can wish away. He goes on to say, furthermore, these public schools sucking up everyone's money through taxes could have additional bathrooms built for the freaks, but they don't. This is all part of their war on humanity. It absolutely is. Because, and I said for the longest time, the idea that, you could have somebody change gender really does feed into the post-humanism of the global elite. The idea that this is all just a construct. When you look at what the furries are doing, they just want to get everybody onto a virtual reality hooked up online so that you don't have any physical reaction with anybody. They want you to transcend the physical, and they want you simply to operate and to live in this fantasy world that they create. That has always been the case. I said, before I said that about posthumanism, I said, well, if you look at this, if a child, this is also something being driven by the pedophile elite. I said, if a child who is, let's say, 8 or 10 years old can determine that they are in the wrong body, and if they're going to be allowed then to undergo surgery or hormone injections to physically change that body in a way that in many cases is not reversible, if you're going to say that a child can make that type of decision, then what you're really ultimately arguing for, these people who are pushing this stuff through, they're really arguing for pedophile agenda. If a kid can consent to mutilating themselves sexually, then they're mature enough to consent to sex with somebody like Alan Dershowitz, which suits him fine. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the Trump regime in the military about vaccines. Remember, they made a big case of the fact that they were going to stop the vaccine mandates. That has been the Republican go-to position, saying, well, okay, Trump funded and pushed these vaccines, as he said in his own words. I pushed them so hard, they would have never done it, but I told them, you get this done or you're fired. I remember when that happened in October of 2020. I talked about it at that point in time. And he said over and over again, I'm the father of the vaccine. Well, to deflect away from that and to defend him, the Republicans have taken the position that, yeah, but it was Biden who mandated it. Certainly this thing was a bioweapon and it was poison, but it's okay that Trump created that thing. As much as we hate it, it was Biden mandating it that was the evil thing. And of course, Jason Barker, who was in the military, who fought all this stuff, Jason did a great job of coming up with a religious exemption talking points. And we had that up on our website for quite some time. We had a lot of people who were in different professions who found that to be very useful as a template for things that they suggested ways that they could fight this on a religious objection basis. But the military was very strict with all this stuff. And when Hegseth came in, he said, I'm going to get rid of all this DEI stuff and all this CRT stuff, and I'm going to get rid of the vaccine mandates. Well, guess what? The Navy just brought back the flu shot mandates just prior to the administration approving the new Moderna mRNA flu vaccine. Yeah, that's what they're doing right now. And so forget about War Pete following through on his promises. Forget about Maha. Forget about RFK Jr. You got Trump has just nominated perhaps the most rabidly pro-vaccine person we've seen outside of Fauci, just put her in charge of the CDC. She's out there pushing everything about the childhood vaccine schedule as well as mRNA. And so now they've got a new mRNA flu vaccine that the Navy is going to mandate.
You do not allow the Department of Defense to issue a self-inflicted harm order to the Department of Defense, where you take military men and women, people who are trained, advanced fighting forces, Navy SEALs, special forces, special air wings in the Air Force. You do not take our best defense and sideline them by forcing them to take a kill shot. You do not do that if you're playing for the same team.
But Pete Hegseth is doing it, or Pete is doing that, absolutely. And as you saw that video that was playing, they had all these people lined up, and they've got someone on either side. They get an injection in each shoulder as they're walking through the line. The next person comes up and gets it. And as was pointed out by Tom Rentz, he said this is all happening on the heels of the passage of Section 535, or the Selective Service System automatic registration. They're going to automatically register you or your children for the draft. And when I look at that, I think about what is happening in Ukraine. We've seen video after video of how people do not want to go fight this war for Ukraine. And they're trying to escape the country in various ways. We've seen them attacking men on the street. The most recent one that I saw was they had a guy in a car, and they were trying to drag him out, and his wife was there hanging on to him and wouldn't let them get to him, and they were pulling her off of him and pulling him out of the car. They have killed people in the process of drafting them if you don't want to fight in their wars. And so this is where we are headed in our society as it gets increasingly totalitarian and authoritarian. As a matter of fact, as I pointed out before, I showed you that picture of the 21-year-old Australian mom of 3 that had an exemption for the pandemic, but they didn't care. They were going to push her through that anyway. So when we look at the pharmaceutical companies, it's just like the agricultural, big ag, big pharma, or big Israel. They've all got these politicians by the pocketbook. They're bribing them, and they get exactly what they want. And even at the local level, as you heard when I talked to the state representative from Iowa, she was talking about the approval of these data centers. And she said in many cases, these people who are at a very low level in terms of the local government, some of these positions where they're making these decisions are even a volunteer position. They make these decisions and they go to work for the company that they just helped. We got a new Amazon data center that is stoking worries that it might be the most polluting power plant in the U.S. This is why I said earlier, perhaps the climate MacGuffin is dead. They're investing in a natural gas burning power plant as part of a huge data center in Texas, even as Amazon promises to honor their climate commitments. The hypocrisy and the lies at this point are blatantly obvious to everyone, I think. Investing in a large-scale natural gas-burning power plant, and the climate people are apoplectic. They're having vapors, I guess, about this CO2 gas. Powered by new on-site generation that will not raise electricity costs for Texas families. The new gas-burning plant, if built to specifications, will be permitted to release 33 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. Regulatory records show more planet-warming gases than any other power plant in the country. Planet-warming gases. But here's what it looks like. All these people who have hectored us over everything, over our washing machines and our appliances, they now have absolutely no problem with these massive heat islands of these data centers. That's what some of the people have put up graphically. And, of course, Trump says that everybody is begging for these.
That really want the data centers. And frankly, those are the smart communities because it means tremendous numbers of jobs, very little actual disruption. And the ones that don't want it, the happiest people in the world are foreign countries, number one, and number two, other communities within our country because they're begging for them to be there. And some of them are great communities, very, very forward-looking communities.
Yeah, right. Well, as the New York Times points out, there's 82 data centers that are either built or being built right now. When they all come online, it could spew enough emissions in 1 year to rival the output of half of the passenger cars in the United States. And of course, they're not going to stop there. They're rapidly building these things out. It will soon be more than all of the passenger cars. So why do we have to give up our passenger cars? And again, they're not easing any of the restrictions on this. They're not getting rid of all the regulatory regulations that have been put in place by Republicans and Democrats over the years. No, that's all staying in place. Trump is saying, he's moving back away from some of the climate change stuff. At the same time, leaving in the regulations and things like that make it very unaffordable to own a internal combustion engine. And if you can't afford an EV because he has blocked the cheap ones from China, just remember you can always get a Waymo ride in a cheap EV that they are allowed to buy. So again, these are private generators coming from Zuckerberg or Musk. The electricity that they will supply is intended for their own data centers. Trump said that from day one. If you remember his Stargate program, when he was there, he said, well, I'm telling all these different companies, you don't want to rely on the grid. He said the grid is old, it's unreliable. Of course, implied in that, as I said on day one, I said, well, that tells you that he's not interested at all in fixing the grid for you and I. He only wants these companies to build whatever they want as quickly as they want. And they're building them without people even knowing it. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.